Welcome back. You're watching Channel 1 Liverpool with me, Rifat Malik. Channel 1 Tubruk. Channel 1 Albert Dock. Time to take a look at the headlines now.
It's 10 to 11, I'm Rifat Malik. 9 o'clock, I'm Rifat Malik.
Christopher Older was found dead. All political campaigning has stopped. Stand head to head with...
Hello and welcome to the Muslim Viewpoint, a new video podcast series powered by American Muslim Today. I'm your host, Rifat Malik, and today we are continuing our Get Out the Vote series. Joining us is Addul Ali, who is running as the Republican candidate to represent North Carolina's 12th Congressional District. So thank you so much for joining us today, Addul. I wanted to start off by asking you why you're standing for office and why do you believe that you would be a better representative than the incumbent Democratic candidate, Alma Adams, who's held the seat for nearly 10 years?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for the opportunity and say assalamu alaikum to all of the members and people that are watching. First and foremost, I feel like it's my civic duty to run for office. I had some friends on both sides of the aisle call me and ask me if I would consider running for office. And then when I considered the conditions of my community, mainly around early childhood literacy, the upward economic mobility, and the safety and security issues that the 12th district is facing, I felt like we've had enough of someone who spent over 2 decades, going on 35 years in government, and has voted, majority of the time along party lines. So I felt that it was my civic duty, first of all. And second of all, I felt like I would be able to do a better job than the incumbent because I want to focus on the issues that are relevant to my community, which are, again, the upward economic mobility. Our city ranks 38 out of 50 among major cities for upward economic mobility. Our children are still coming out of high schools functionally illiterate. And obviously, with everything going on with the rise in violent crime in Charlotte, that's something we want to take head on. And I think I can do a better job of that than the current representative.
On a national level, Vice President Kamala Harris is, I think, narrowly leading in the polls, although in many polls it's pretty much neck and neck. What do you see as the value of Donald Trump for the Republican Party, and why would you support his re-election to the presidency?
Great question. One, I think that a perfect indicator of future performance is past performance. And when we look at Donald Trump's record on the border, his record on the economy, and we look at the current performance of the Biden-Harris administration and what the Harris-Walz campaign are pushing forward as policies, their policies would be absolutely devastating to every single community in our country. And then I also think that the value that Donald Trump brings to the Republican Party is that there are millions of people who would have never taken a look at being a Republican, save Donald Trump coming in and kind of revamping the party. I also think that when you look at our new RNC platform that was largely inspired by President Trump, you'll see a streamlined platform that is more accepting of Americans from every walk of life, every geopolitical disposition. And it's something that I think most Americans can get behind. So the value in him is not only, like I said, past performance being a future indicator of future performance, but I also think that he brought a level of excitement and an America First agenda that most people can get along with.
You say most people, but I think a lot of people would argue that he created a lot of division in the country. The activities of some of his supporters, the MAGA supporters, particularly on January the 6th, was a frightening example of divisive rhetoric, and that's been attributed directly to President Trump. Do you feel what happened on January the 6th and other violent actions by his supporters, does that reflect the values of the Republican Party?
Well, I think the first thing we have to look at and say is, was January 6th something that President Trump incited? And the answer to that is unequivocally no. And I think that when we look at the vast majority of domestic violence in this country, it wasn't conservatives that were burning down cities across this country. As a matter of fact, the vice presidential candidate watched as cities in his state burned. So I push back a little bit on the idea that it's conservatives and Republicans and Trump supporters that are out there conducting the majority of the violence that's happening in our country. I also think that the media is partially responsible for stoking this division we see in our country today. As somebody who's out on the campaign trail, and I talk to Democrats, unaffiliated, I talk to Republicans, I talk to Muslims, I talk to everybody, most Americans are not as far apart on the issues concerning their safety, security, and the economy as the media would portray. So I think a large part of this issue that, people say Donald Trump is divisive, to those who have an agenda of stoking the news and keeping people in fear, he's a divisive figure. But if you've ever had the opportunity to go to a Trump rally and be around, these are some of the salt of the earth, most kind, considerate people. And like I said, it's not Trump supporters who are out there burning down cities when they didn't get their way. That's the people on the left.
But on January the 6th, it was Trump supporters, wasn't it? I mean, a lot of them have been arrested.
There were admittedly people there that were Trump supporters, and I would denounce anybody that uses violence, whether they support President Trump or not. Violence has no place in our political discourse in this country. But this idea that January 6th was somehow, the fault of President Trump, we forget that he simply said, let your voices be heard peacefully. That's something that the media tends to want to not emphasize, the fact that he said to march and let your voices be heard peacefully. So I denounce any violence, any political violence. That's not the way this country is designed to work. There's no place for it in our politics.
You mentioned borders earlier, and it's an issue that you're concerned with, and you mentioned it on your campaign website. Your state has, I think, 8% of its residents are immigrants. How would you address those minorities or migrants who are working for a better life and who want a path to citizenship?
Well, I think first and foremost, for me, as someone who has ancestors who came to this country, my maternal side of my family, people came from Puerto Rico, which was not a state back then or a commonwealth back then. They had to immigrate to this country and do it the right way. And I think to address the situation here, it's not tenable to suggest we're going to deport millions and millions of people. There are folks who unfortunately overstayed their visa. There's all kinds of reasons someone could be undocumented. And I think that we do need to create a pathway to get those folks, legal and to get them their documentation that they need. But we also have to admit that there is a criminal element of undocumented illegal aliens in our country. Look at Lincoln Riley, and here in North Carolina, we've had multiple instances of criminal illegal aliens. And I think that the bill that came up in our U.S. House to deport illegal aliens that assault police officers was a step in the right direction. And I think we do need to, for lack of a better term, find a pathway to citizenship for those folks. And I don't think that a mass deportation of every undocumented person is realistic or even tenable.
I wanted to talk about reproductive rights for a moment. North Carolina has updated abortion legislation, limits access to 12 weeks with the exceptions for rape and incest, or if there's a severe risk of maternal death. If elected to Congress, do you support restricted access to healthcare for women and families in your district?
No, I think that as a father of a 22-year-old daughter, should she unfortunately have the circumstance where she's raped, incest will never be an issue in our household. But the idea that we are in the two places I don't think government should be, which is the hospital room and the bedroom, is just unconscionable to me. I don't think we can call ourselves the party of liberty and then tell someone what they can't do. But I am also not in favor of abortion being used as a means of birth control, because that is dangerous to women. And I also am not in favor of late stage abortion. Not that that is something that happens frequently in our country, but it's discussed, and I think it's discussed to rile people up. But in those circumstances, what we did here in North Carolina, I think was the right way to approach it. I think that we should be looking at ways to help people when they do have children, so that people want to have children and want to see those children grow to be successful. But I am 1,000% on board with the idea that the government has no place in the hospital room or the bedroom.
So I wanted to talk for a moment about Gaza situation and how it's impacted Americans and so many people in our audience as well. A number of members of Congress boycotted Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent visit to address to Congress, and Vice President Harris didn't actually meet him, although she did attend the address. She did meet him privately afterwards. Do you believe inviting him to speak was appropriate, considering the accusations of genocide and the intense anger by Muslims and Americans from all backgrounds, including Jews and people of different faiths or, no faith, because of what is going on in Gaza? Was it right to invite him?
It's a difficult question in that you don't want to dissuade a sitting leader, a head of state, from coming to address our country. I think the danger in this entire situation is that we have issues in our own country that we need to deal with. I think when we look at our immigration issue, our education issue, and America becoming less competitive on the global stage, we've got our own issues to worry about. Not that I don't think that the Israel-Palestine conflict is important, but I also want to unequivocally state that anywhere where civilians, and I don't care which side of the aisle it's on or which side of the issue it is, I am unequivocally against the killing of innocent life people who are not combatants should not have to worry about their lives being taken from them. And I would just condemn any violence towards civilians in that regard. If the United States could play some role in ensuring that there's a cease to the bloodshed that's happening there, I think we take that role on. But I don't think that we should be bankrolling entire military excursions and militaries of other countries, like I said, when we've got issues of our own that we need to deal with.
Mm-hmm. On a related topic, you will have seen the nationwide protests, especially on campuses and universities across the country. And when we talk about protests, and for instance, comparing it to the January the 6th, which we mentioned before, these were peaceful protests. These were students exercising their right to free speech about an issue that they felt passionately about. And the reaction by the university administrations and by local law enforcement was harsh. They were sort of violently arrested and criminalized. Do you believe, as the party of individual freedom, that they should have been penalized for exercising their right to free speech?
Well, there's a difference, I think, in between exercising free speech and protesting peacefully and what occurred on some of our college campuses. I mean, quite frankly, there was violence on our college campuses, and I think that is out of bounds. Now, I think what we need to recognize is that public universities are public universities. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we're not allowed to have difficult conversations. Universities are supposed to be safe spaces. And I shudder to use that word a little bit, but safe spaces for very difficult conversations where both sides should be heard. So I, again, condemn any violence. And I think that when you get to the point of burning the American flag on college campuses, that's, a touch too far. And again, here in North Carolina, we saw, that there are people assaulted at some of these things, and it's usually not the people on the right that are conducting this type of violence. It's just not. But again, to answer your question directly, yes, they should be allowed to protest as long as it remains peaceful. Yes, we should be having very difficult conversations where we have students from Israel, we have students from Palestine that come to our country and attend our universities. And then you have, I think, the real concern that I have ultimately, and this is just personal, I'm not speaking for everybody here, but I am highly concerned that we have people that would incite violence for the purposes of creating and inciting that division. And I think that the more we can tamp down that violence, tamp down that dissension, and get back to robust conversations where people can agree to disagree, the better off we'll be.
Just finally, on the issue of Gaza, if your leader, the Republican nominee, is elected, what would you expect him to do in regard to Israel? And how do you think he quell the issue that is raging on as we speak?
Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is get a ceasefire. We've got to get people to put their arms down. We've got to get people to the table and talk. And more, easier said than done, quite frankly. But I think that is the key, is to get both sides to a point where they could have some meaningful conversation. This is not an issue that started 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago. This is a long-standing issue. I think we would be remiss to not recognize the fact that the Palestinian people have a right to a homeland and have a right to exist as a free and sovereign country. And Donald Trump has shown that he is willing to sit with anyone that wants to pursue peace, whether that's Kim Jong-un. So I think that would be the first step, is to get these leaders to sit down face to face and really figure out a way to move forward for the benefit of all involved.
I know you yourself are not a Muslim, but you've told us that your twin brother is a Muslim. For those Muslim community members, which is, a couple of million people at least, 4 or 5 million people in America, for those people who are concerned about the election of Donald Trump because of some of the things that he said about Muslims, and also because of some of his policies, such as the Muslim ban, which he has said that he wants to resurrect in a second presidency. What would you say to them if they are fearful for themselves and for their children and their families about the possibility of President Trump being elected again?
Thank you for the question. I think that's a great question. And to the entire Muslim community, to your viewers, I would say I know Muslims that worked for President Trump. My good friend Oz Sultan happened to be very high up in the Trump campaign. So I would say first and foremost that President Trump is not anti-Muslim at all. The second thing that I would say is that we have to recognize that the vast majority of Muslims in our country today are not, and I shudder to use this term, are not radical Islamic terrorists. We have good people who want to live their lives, worship how they see fit. That is what this country was founded on, was religious principles. And I will tell you that I recognize, and President Trump recognizes, that we do not have a country today. We do not have the United States as we know it without a Muslim country, which is Morocco. And I suggest that anybody who thinks differently read the letter from George Washington to the Sultan of Morocco back in the late 1700s, and look at that relationship between the United States and Morocco as a way of showing what our relationships could be between countries. And I also want to recognize that, for those who are fearful, who may look at, rhetoric that the media puts out there, go straight to the source. Go straight to people who know President Trump, the Muslims that have worked for him and that support him, because there are a lot of folks in the Muslim community that support President Trump. I also think that we have to be clear about the ban, and I hate the term, it was a Muslim ban, but we're talking about countries in some cases where people wanted to hurt the United States. And we have to do a better job of explaining that that is not all Muslims. Not all Muslims believe that the United States is the great Satan and all that kind of thing. There are, like you said, millions of Muslims who are Americans who love this country and who want to see it prosper and want the opportunity that this country affords. So I would say to your audience and to those Muslims across the country, continue to love the country, continue to pray and worship as you see fit, and just know that Donald Trump, myself, if I'm elected, will do everything possible to ensure that you are protected, that you have every right like a full American citizen that you deserve.
Addul, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.